Good Friday afternoon to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for joining us today on Walking Through History as we continue our reading and walking through the book of the Judges of Israel. We are excited to be in this text, and we have, at least I have really enjoyed the studies that we've had in this text thus far as we've been looking at this particular section of the history of Israel, a very turbulent, a very up and down, a very volatile time within the nation of Israel. And yet, even within a time such as this, there's so many lessons that we can learn from what is taking place within the book of Judges, lessons that we can learn from that can help us to be more faithful to God, even during our own turbulent and sometimes somewhat volatile times. Thank you for joining us today. Hope that you've had a great week. Hope that you have a Bible and you might join us in Judges chapter 4 and Judges chapter 5. Today, I'm joined, as always, by my good friend Alan Sienestrang. Alan, it's good to see you today. Hope that you're ready to go through the story of Deborah and Barak and Sisera getting taken out by a really sneaky housewife. It's going to be another very interesting and action-packed story today.
Oh man, I love it. The book of Judges is just fun because each of these stories, there's just nothing like it in the rest of the Bible. There's just something like you getting stabbed in the head by a tent peg, and last week Ehud, stabbing the guy in the fat and all that. Just right. There's just some interesting, you just don't see too many parallels throughout the rest of the Bible, which highlights how bad things were during this period, that all of these things are happening, but makes for some fun read. I was laughing. I've always wondered, why don't we see more like movies and stuff about things in the Bible? And Judges kind of highlights, like, I mean, if we had a movie about the book of Judges, it'd be rated R or worse. We wouldn't let our kids go see it because the rating would be too bad. You wouldn't be able to see half of the story of the Bible.
Yeah, you're not wrong about that, which is why it's funny that we often spend so much time in our kids' classes on Judges, and yet what we often teach our kids about the Judges is a very toned down, G-rated version of the Judges, as opposed to what we actually have, which is Benjamite assassins and non-Israelite ninjas killing 600 Philistines with a cattle prod, which is basically a big piece of wood that's often tipped with metal. It's often used. Whenever we think of a cattle prod, the very first thing we might think of is Paul in the New Testament, where the Lord says, "Why are you kicking against the goads?" That cattle goad is the same thing as this cattle prod. You'd use that stick with that piece of metal to kind of goad the cattle along, to move them as you're moving them from place to place, to encourage them to move, I should say. Well, here now we take this man Shamgar, and he takes a cattle rod and kills 600 Philistines with it. It's just an incredible thing to think about. But yeah, lots of action here within the Judges, within this story of Deborah and Barak. And before we get into that, we'll notice a couple of things just from some visual aids that we have. Alan, I want to pull up one of them here, being the kind of the cross references between these different judges that we talked last time about Othniel, and the similarities and the contrasting things that we see between him and Samson. We didn't talk about all that much, but even Ehud and Shamgar, there again, similarities and contrasting elements between them, and then Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon from chapter 10, verse 6, maybe chapter 11 and chapter 12. I need to fix that on that particular scriptural reference. But then the story here with Deborah and Barak, Alan, it lines up really well with Abimelech, Tola, and Jair, especially with the inclusion of women in this story. That's the thing that really stands out the most about these stories, Alan, is the role that women play. We talked last time about how the people that played the greatest parts within the story of the Judges are often not the people that we think would play those parts, the parts of saviors and deliverers and military leaders and killers in many instances. With Othniel, his background is that of being a descendant of Esau, not Jacob. Whenever we think of Shamgar, again, a non-Israelite more than likely, Here within the story of Deborah and Barak, we don't see Barak taking the lead like he probably would have in most cases. Instead, Deborah takes the lead, and the one who ends up killing the bad guy isn't a man at all. It's another woman named Jael. But we'll notice all that as we go throughout this text. Alan, we'll be reading from Judges chapter 4 today. Judges chapter 4, and Judges chapter 4 is going to begin where every story of the Judges begins, with the unfaithfulness of Israel. That the Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud had died. So the Lord sold them to King Jabin of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth of the nations. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord because Jabin had 900 iron chariots, and he harshly oppressed them 20 years. Then Deborah, a prophetess and the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. And she would sit under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites went up to her to settle disputes. She summoned Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh of Naphtali, and said to him, "Hasn't the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you? Go, deploy the troops on Mount Tabor, and take with you 10,000 men from the Naphtalites and Zebulunites. Then I will lure Sisera, commander of Jabin's army, his chariots and infantry at the Wadi Kishon to fight against you, and I will hand him over to you." So here is Deborah calling this man before him and saying, "This is what the Lord has said against you." She's a prophetess. This is what she has said, and you are going to lead this attack. But Barak says to her in verse number 8, "If you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go." Deborah says, "I will gladly go with you, but you will receive no honor on the road you're about to take, because the Lord will sell Sisera to a woman." So Deborah got up and went with Barak to Kadesh, and Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh. 10,000 men followed him, and Deborah also went with him. Now Heber the Kenite had moved away from the Kenites, the sons of Hobab. Moses, his father-in-law, pitched his tent beside the oak tree of Zananim, which was near Kadesh. It was reported to Sisera that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, and Sisera summoned all his 900 iron chariots, and all the troops were with him from Harosheth of the nations to the Wadi Kishon. Then Deborah said to Barak, "Go, this is the day the Lord has handed Sisera over to you. Hasn't the Lord gone before you?" So Barak came down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. And the Lord threw Sisera, all his charioteers, and all his army into a panic before Barak's assault. And Sisera left his chariot and fled on foot. And Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as Harosheth and the nations. And the whole army of Sisera fell by the sword. Not a single man was left. Meanwhile, verse 17, Sisera had fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because there was peace between King Jabin of Hazor and the family of Heber the Kenite. And Jael went out to greet Sisera and said to him, "Come in, my lord. Come in with me. Don't be afraid." So he went into her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. He said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty." She opened a container of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him again. Then he said to her, "Stand at the entrance to the tent. If a man comes and asks you, 'Is there a man here?' say no." And while he was sleeping from exhaustion, Heber's wife Jael took a tent peg, grabbed a hammer, and went silently to Sisera. She hammered the peg into his temple and drove it into the ground, and he died. And when Barak arrived in pursuit of Sisera, Jael went out to greet him and said to him, "Come, and I will show you the man you are looking for." So she went in with him, and there was Sisera lying with a tent peg through his temple. That day, God subdued Jabin of the King Jabin of Canaan before the Israelites, and the power of the Israelites continued to increase against King Jabin of Canaan until they destroyed him. Again, there's a lot going on here within this text, Alan. What do you see as being the role that Deborah is playing in this particular story? There are some who would claim that Deborah isn't isn't exactly a judge in the sense of the rest of the judges of this book. Maybe because the Lord didn't, it's not specifically said that the Lord raised her up. And yet, I think she fits a lot in the mold of what we see here within the text. Talk some about her role, uh, Barak's hesitancy in leading this charge against the oppression against Israel, and then finally what Jael does in this text. She really becomes the star of the show here, taking out the bad guy once and for all at the end. Why don't you share with us what you've studied from this text?
Well, we get some interesting words to describe Deborah. She's a prophetess. We haven't really seen a prophetess, I don't think of any, since Miriam, Moses's older sister. So you don't really see too many prophetesses in the Bible. So, but it does say she was judging Israel at the time, and I would say she's probably the most like a judge as we would think of her, as any of them, because she says she was settling disputes at the end of verse 5. That sounds much more like a how a judge was. But
Reminds me of Moses in the wilderness with the Israelites as he was
and
judgments of the people.
and there's a lot of Moses comparisons when you think about this story. We have Deborah, and we're fighting against a king with lots of chariots, and the king, the Lord throws them into confusion, much like Pharaoh's army was thrown into confusion at the Red Sea, and defeated. Then you even have a song at the end of the story, much like Miriam singing a song after the crossing of the Red Sea back in chapter 14 of Exodus, 12, 13, 14, somewhere in there. So there, I mean, we're supposed to, I think, see Deborah as kind of a parallel to Moses here, I think, in that same way. But it's just interesting because, again, she's a woman, and that's not typically the ones that would rise up and be a leader. So the Bible is very interesting in that way, that we have so many female characters, which compared to any other writings or historical accounts of that time, I mean, obviously women were not considered anything but maybe a step above slaves. So the fact that so many women take prominent roles in the text is interesting. And there's a commonality, I think, so far with just about every single woman that pops up in a story so far. There's always they've always been kind of winning some sort of fight against an evil, wicked person, typically through some sort of deception. And I think that ties all the way back to the curse against the serpent in the Garden of Eden, and that promise that the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman would constantly be at enmity with each other. And we know that was kind of looking, I think, toward the cross a little bit, but we actually see some fulfillment up until the cross. Seems like every time a woman pops up in the Bible, she's deceiving in some way, or using her cunning or deception to defeat an evil or wicked person. I think about Rahab,
Powerful person,
a more powerful, yeah. So Rahab, using deception to help the spies get out of Jericho. In a minute, we're going to see Jael, using deception to lure Sisera into her tent. Deborah mentioned in verse 7, I will lure Sisera's army into at the Wadi Kishon to fight. I mean, basically, this was a bad place for a bunch of heavy iron chariots to be fighting. This would have been a lots of water. So to lure him there would have equaled the playing field, and that would have been stupid by Sisera, but he's lured in. I think about the two women, the midwives that Pharaoh told to throw all the babies into the Nile River, and they kind of use this deception to stop that. They did not have all the babies killed in the first part of Exodus. So very often these women pop up, and they're they're fighting against these wicked seeds of the serpent, if you will. And literally JL, crushes the head of
Right.
the serpent there, in a sense.
Would you bring that
So
up? That can help us tie in what we see in chapter 4. One of the cool things about this whole story, Alan, that hopefully we're understanding is we're able to see it from a couple different perspectives. We're able to see it, first of all, from the narrative perspective that's found in chapter 4, but in chapter 5 we have a song that's written about this whole situation, and it gives us greater detail about what's going on apart from what we see within the narrative. We see some of the background of what's taking place. We're seeing the emotions that are being experienced during this whole episode with Deborah and Barak, and then King Jabin, who is ruling over the people this time. You talked about that language of her crushing the head. That's exactly what's said in chapter 5 and verse number 26. Verse 24 says that Jael is the most blessed of women, the king of Heber, the Kenite. She is most blessed among tent-dwelling women. She's the greatest of the housewives, basically. She asked for water. She gave him milk. She brought him cream in a majestic bowl. And then she reached for a tent peg, her right hand for a workman's hammer. And then she hammered Sisera. She crushed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. He collapsed. He fell. He lay down between her feet. He collapsed. He fell between her feet. Where he collapsed, there he fell dead. What? You can't read that and think about the situation here and those echoes continuing from Genesis 3 onward and not think about that prophecy that the seed of woman, though the serpent would nip at its heel, it would end up crushing the head. And if we're paying careful attention as we walk through this story of the Bible, we're going to see these instances pop up time and time again.
And I like, we don't see this in the first story, but I love this little tag at the end comparing, these seemingly good and positive characters of Jael and Deborah, these two women, and compare that to Sisera's mother here in verse 28. She's looking through the window and she's wondering, why isn't he come home? And and what's the answer? Why has he not come home? What are they don't know yet that he's dead, but they figure, oh, he's just out, he's finding some spoil, maybe a girl or two. Hopefully what'd you say? Hopefully he's going to bring me home a scarf, I think. Wow. Yeah. The spoil of embroidered garment or two for my neck. Hopefully he'll bring me home a scarf.
As he's out doing all these horrible, terrible things, well, at least maybe he'll bring me a little memento that I can keep. It's just a ridiculous mindset for this woman to have, thinking of the treachery that her son was committed and almost making a joke out of it between herself and those who are around her. It's just absolutely ridiculous to see the contrasting mindsets of these women here.
And it highlights, I mean, if Sisera's mother is this bad, then, what were Sisera and all the other Jabin, the king there, what were they all like? I mean, we didn't even mention back this Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor back in verse 1. Well, we've already seen a king of the same name be defeated by the Israelites way back in Joshua chapter 6 or 7, somewhere in there. It's part of the northern campaign. Obviously, I don't think this is the same Jabin, but the name of Hazor, the city, was raised back then. It was completely burned. But just like how Eglon comes in and retakes Jericho, now it seems like Hazor, this city that had been taken by Joshua, has been allowed to be retaken by the Canaanites. So, all that work that Joshua did throughout that book, it's being reversed. It's been lost because the Israelites were not strong and did not have enough faith to hold on to it. So these place names are very interesting, that they've allowed all that to happen to them again.
Right. Yeah. You're talking about Joshua 11 is whenever they go and they fight against that King Jabin. And as you mentioned, they completely destroy Hazor, that it's just gone. And that should have been how it stayed. Same thing with Jericho that we saw in our last study on Tuesday. that Jericho should have been destroyed and uninhabited, but instead they allowed King Eglon to go and to build his his rule there within that place. So much of what Joshua did positively has now been negatively unraveled within the judges, which is why these individuals are having to rise up. If we're reading the story for the first time, Alan, especially someone who is reading this in its original context of that time, they're going to read about somebody whose name is Lapidoth, and then they're going to read about this Barak guy. And here are two men whose names mean thunder and lightning. It might make us think of New Testament, James and John, the sons of thunder, that these were people of great action. And yet between these two men is Deborah. Deborah, this prophetess who within the original text, the original language of Hebrew here, there is a number of emphases to the fact that she is a woman. Like, it is not left up to chance that people would recognize who she is. It is emphasized that she is a woman, and that she's a woman and her name Deborah, meaning something like bee, something we would not think of being very strong, might be insignificant in many ways, especially when compared to thunder or lightning here. Yet she's the one that has to be the person to really take action. If she's not going to go, Barak says, if you don't go, I'm not going to go. And it just shows his cowardice here within this particular story, which again shows the shortcomings of the judges within this story of the book of the Judges. That each of them, they're progressively getting worse, and that they have weaknesses built upon more weaknesses. And it also tells us a little something about just the people in general. Again, it's cool that we have chapter 5, Alan, because it gives us a little insight into what's going on behind the scenes in chapter 4. Particularly, I'm thinking about what we see in verse number 12 of chapter 5, where Deborah and Barak are singing this song, and they say, "Awake, awake, Deborah. Awake, awake, sing a song. Arise, Barak, and take your prisoners, son of Abinoam." Then survivors came down to the nobles, and the Lord's people came down to me like a warrior. Those with their roots in Amalek came from Ephraim. Benjamin came with your people after you. The leaders came down from Machir, which is Manasseh, and those who carry a martial staff came from Zebulun. The princes of Issachar were with Deborah. Issachar was with Barak. They were under his leadership in the valley. So here we're speaking of the people who were willing to help in this particular battle against the forces of Sisera and of King Jabin. But then there were people who failed to rise up and act in this particular instance. There was great searching of the heart among the clans of Reuben. Why did you sit among the sheep's pens, listening to the playing of pipes for the flocks? There was great searching of the heart among the clans of Reuben. Gilead, which is Gad, remained beyond the Jordan. Dan, why did you linger at the ships? Asher remained at the seashore and stayed at his harbors. But it was the people of Zebulun, they defied death. And Naphtali also, on the heights of the battlefield, we have those who are willing to step up and help. And then we have the people of Israel who were not willing to do anything. They were going to be weak. They were going to show their cowardice, which is exactly what we see with Barak. He was not willing to do anything unless Deborah stepped up. And then there were some within Israel who did not do anything at all, which didn't force God to do what he did through Jael, but it gave opportunity to show once again, and this is one of the things we're stressing in these stories of the judges, is that the Lord can use anyone in order to accomplish his purposes. He can use anyone in order to carry out his goals. This time, in this particular story, it was a woman prophetess, a woman judge named Deborah, and then it was a lowly housewife named Jael, the wife of Heber, the Kenites, who ended up taking down the enemy in this particular instance. What you mentioned earlier, the tie-ins to Moses, the Kenites would have been the people of Moses' in-laws, who again are assimilating into Israel, which is another theme that we're seeing throughout this text, where people that are outside of Israel are coming into Israel, and unfortunately those who are within Israel are often becoming like those outside of Israel. Alan, want to know one more thing, and then the rest is yours. You want to finish this out? I want to note verse 15. Verse 15. I want to note verse 15, just like I noted chapter 3 and verse number 28. just like I noted chapter 3 and verse number 10, that the true power behind the successes of Othniel, of Ehud, and of Barak and Deborah was the Lord. Verse 15, the Lord threw Sisera, all his charioteers, and all his army into a panic before Barak's assault. And then Sisera left his chariot and fled on foot. Here we see the power of God on full display. They were not going to do anything if not for the Lord's help. The Lord was rejected. Verse number 1, they did what was evil in the Lord's sight. So he sells them into the power of King Jabin of Canaan, who was reigning at Hazor, which was a place that should have not been inhabited any longer. And then eventually, Deborah tells Barak, it's time for you to step up and to be the person who's going to give deliverance, which is interesting here, Alan, because I don't really see. Let me see. I might have missed it in chapter 5, but I don't see what we have seen before in the people crying out to the Lord. I don't believe. No, I don't believe it's not there like it's been before. So here is the Lord again in his gracious mercy, delivering a people who are just going to continue to reject him. The emphasis here must not be on the people, whether they are the likely heroes or the unlikely heroes. The emphasis here must be on the Lord and the power that he's providing to deliver these people out of the hands of wicked people, even though they themselves are often acting like very wicked people. Alan, what do you have to close us out for this particular study on this Friday afternoon?
That's one thing I wanted to highlight was just you don't see the Lord doesn't wait for the people to okay, we finally figured out what's going on. It's because we've sinned. Lord, we repent of our sin. Please rescue us. He doesn't wait for that. He loves his people too much. I think that's what we're seeing here. He doesn't even wait for them to say sorry. He wants to deliver them because he sees their oppression. He sees he sees what's going on. I mean, the people of Israel, spent generations in Egypt, and they were crying out, but were they crying out saying, Lord, forgive us? No, the Lord just knew they were suffering, so he finally came and delivered them. And this is what happens throughout Judges. I mean, not clearly by the fact that pretty soon after the Lord gives them victory, they're back into their old ways. They clearly aren't sorry, but the Lord still delivers them just to try to give them a chance to try to give them a break, give them some peace. Hopefully they'll repent. But I think it's more just highlighting the Lord's the Lord's love for them. I mean, who wouldn't do that for a child you love? Even if they didn't say you're sorry, you're still going to run. And, if a child leaves and falls away, we would still, if they called and need help, we'd probably go and help them because we love them. Even if they didn't renounce what what they should have, we'd want to help them if they needed it because we love them. Same thing's happening here. And like we've mentioned, the Lord's going to use these unlikely heroes to do that. And but even this is kind of ironic that of the three kind of major positive players here, Deborah, Jael, and then Barak, it's actually Barak that's mentioned later on in Hebrews. And that's not because he's the best of them here, but he's just yet another instance of someone that defeated kingdoms, I think it says, or put to flight wicked nations. I mean, the Lord used him by faith, and even though he had his doubts and he wanted Deborah to go with him, he still went, and he still obtained victory through the Lord's help. So these are all in some ways they are characters to emulate and to look at. But one thing that Judges is doing to highlight even more so than Genesis, Exodus, and the previous books is that all of these supposed heroes, while yes they had faith in some ways, they had doubts and flaws and sins just like the rest of us. I mean, there's really no one No one in the Bible that we can be like, that is the perfect guy, that is the perfect example, until we get to Matthew chapter 2, and we finally see someone that we can finally look at as a hero, as the perfect man.
Think of the people that you refer to that are mentioned in Hebrews 11 and verse 32. What more can I say? Time is too short to tell about Gideon. We'll read about him next time and his failures. Barak and his cowardice. Samson and his womanizing. Jephthah, his foolishness. And then there's David, Samuel, and the prophets. Of all the judges that could have been mentioned as having great faith, it was those four. That's just interesting to me. Maybe that's something we could talk with the Lord about once we're in eternity with him. But do you have anything else, Alan, you want to share with us today before we close out? All right. We appreciate so much you having been with us today as we have been working our way through the book of the Judges, chapters 4 and chapter 5 today, telling the story and then looking at the song that was sung by Deborah and Barak concerning what took place in chapter 4. Hope that it has been a blessing to you. Hope that it has reminded you of the importance of relying upon God, that he is the one who provides all the strength that we need in order to have success, that he can even use us in our weaknesses and our struggles to be faithful. Hope that it has been a blessing to you and that it will encourage you moving forward in your faith. Hope you can join us next time as we continue our walk through history. Judges chapter 6 will be on the docket for Tuesday.
Probably next week. I think we'll cover Gideon over both. I think it's 3 chapters, but we'll try to cover him over two lessons.
That'll work. Yeah,
we'll check. I don't know where Gideon. The divide will be, but we'll get through him throughout the week.
Cool, that'll work. We'll get through Gideon next week. Gideon serves as a good kind of as a good middle point for the story of the Judges, as you can see. I think it's on the screen right now. Alan, do you see something on the screen right now? Okay. Yeah. So this on the screen right here, this cycle of the Judges kind of shows you the progression throughout the story and the similarities between what is going on here within the story. Hope that you'll join us for that next week, Tuesday and Friday, as we're going through that study. And then if we're looking for a group of saints to worship with on Sunday, we invite you to join us. We'll be in the book of the Gospel of Mark on Sunday morning, looking at the issues that Jesus had with his disciples as they were seeking to be the greatest. Who is the greatest, they ask. Jesus is going to discuss that important topic with them in our study on Sunday morning. Hope you can join us for that. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to us and let us know. If you have any spiritual needs that we can help you with, again, let us know. Reach out to us on our Facebook page or our website, armorofgodonline.com. You can find that, or Google Pleasant Plains Church of Christ, Jackson, Tennessee. Will pop up there quickly for you. Reach out to us so we can serve you anyway. We'd love to show you the love of Jesus working through us and show our love for you in those ways if we can. Just thank you so much again. Have a great weekend. Hope you'll join us next time as we continue to walk through history here in our study, considering the story of God's word that leads us to greater knowledge, greater trust, and greater faith. Everyone take care and God bless.